Most entities that we find in mythology are archetypes of sorts. They represent something fundamental to the overall cosmos. They're symbols of things that we experience in our internal reality. In other words, they're not just fictional figments of our imagination, they have really deep, fundamental, symbolic meaning. For instance, whenever we look at the god Odin of the Norse mythology, he represents the experience of Odd, which is also found in his name, Odin, so to speak. And that is the overall muse of existence, the overall inspiration and ambition, the artistic thrill, the frenzy of creativity that takes over a person. Whenever we're looking at Christianity, Christ is a symbol for the self and how the self is found and reflected in everybody. That there's always an I in almost everything, and so therefore we're not an I as an individual, so to speak, but we're an I of a whole unit. Fundamentally, an aspect of the overall species. That is what the Christ represents. But what does the devil symbolize? What is the devil archetype, in other words? Really, the devil is a sort of trickster deity. He is an antagonist. He is the contrarian. He is the shadow of doubt. He is the devil's advocate, so to speak. He is the constant negating force of the world. We tend to think of the devil as evil and wicked and vile, but that is not necessarily his actual role. That's not what he really represents. Instead, he represents the thing that is the contrarian value, the thing that puts us into a state of doubt, that makes us question. He is the entity of unawareness. He is the anti-habitual, the anti-normalized, the anti-establishment, the anti-status quo, so to speak. He is everything which is sort of ambitious and chaotic. Everything that sort of comes out of the blue, and everything that is sporadic and at random. He is the embodiment of the anti-formula, so to speak. To whereas Christ represents extreme formulation, where God represents the power of creation through systematic approach, Satan is also a creator force. But he is the creator through spontaneity, through frenzy, so to speak, much akin to Odin, and through the chaotic forces of life. He is the unpredictable aspect of the human existence. And like Joseph Campbell says, all devils, all demons in other words, that are considered evil are not evil per se, but the devils are unrecognized gods. And of course the gods are forces, or symbols for forces in other words. So what he's saying is that what we consider evil, what we consider vile, what we consider malevolent and sinister, are simply forces that we have not recognized or that we refuse to recognize. And so therefore, when we integrate these things, then they all of a sudden become gods and goddesses. They become divine. They become something that we can utilize in our life. When we're trying to shove them down, when we're trying to repress them, that is when they take on this scary, malevolent, evil, wicked, vile persona. But when we recognize them, when we actually accept them, when we integrate them, that is the shadow aspect. And oftentimes the devil is equated with the shadow in Jungian psychology. This is not at random. This is very calculated in the overall structure of the cosmos. When we integrate the shadow becomes a useful tool of our psychology. So in this Campbell type aspect, when we integrate the devils and the demons in our lives, when we recognize these trickster forces in our own psychology and our own fundamental makeup and in the nature as a whole, in our overall existence, then all of a sudden they become less diabolical. They become less demonic, and they become something that we can utilize. And this is played out in the devil motif over and over and over again through all the Grimm's fairy tales, through all the folklore of the devil, from every time that he comes about in any fantastical literature. He is the bad guy only until he is integrated. Once he is accepted, once he is recognized, he is used for forces of good. And that is why we find in Faust, the devil says that I am the one that eternally wills evil, but perpetually works good. So is the devil necessarily an archetype of evil? Absolutely not, because all things in nature exist in a realm beyond good and evil. Everything good and evil is a function of human imagination. It is a construct of our own thoughts and is not really represented in nature. But archetypes are found in nature. So there is no such thing as an evil archetype per se. So the devil does not represent evil. He represents trickery. He represents the unpredicted factor. He represents that shadow of doubt, and he represents the shadow within us. But if we can integrate him, he can be a useful, profound, and almost miraculous tool to the overall psychological makeup, the individuation process, and ultimately what we all seek, the Jungian transcendent function.